Welcome to The Eye Opener. I'm your host, Michael Lewis. Happy 4th of July. Now let's talk about what Americans should truly celebrate on Independence Day. Former President Trump said he has made up his mind about the 2024 presidential race, while Harris's prospects continue to decline as heir apparent. Meanwhile, the Biden administration continues to push to make it easier for immigrants to become citizens. Would this include illegals as well? A former Chinese police officer gave appalling details of forced human organ harvesting. That's right, I said forced human organ harvesting in China. Okay, my friends, let's take a closer look together. I hope everyone had a great 4th of July. When Americans celebrate the national holiday with parades and fireworks, most of us forget that when members of the 56th Continental Congress signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776, they made a grim decision. At the time, Great Britain was the most powerful nation on earth. The 13 colonies were rather poor and divided. Britain deemed the act treasonous and punishable by death. The 56 signatories, in fact, had signed their own death warrants. George Washington was not one of the signatories. While the Continental Congress assembled in Philadelphia, Washington and his army were in New York. But like many others in the Continental Army, Washington had been waiting for this declaration for quite some time. When he finally received notification about it a week later, the general immediately directed each regiment to hire its own pastor. He wrote in the July 9th General Orders, "The blessings and protection of heaven are at all times necessary, but especially so in times of public distress and danger. The general hopes and trusts that every officer and man will endeavor so to live and act as becomes a Christian soldier defending the dearest rights and liberties of his country." As the commander-in-chief, Washington experienced frequent defeats and setbacks against the British. To persevere despite all challenges, faith played an important role in Washington's life during the 8-year Revolutionary War. He constantly prayed for his troops and for his country. In fact, the essence of the Declaration of Independence is inalienable God-given human rights. It reads, "All men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." The Declaration also asserts, if men's governments become destructive of these rights, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. When we gather for the 4th of July, we should commemorate the courage of our founding fathers. And what we celebrate isn't just the birth of America, but also our inalienable rights and freedom which come from God, not the state. However, during the last several decades, American values that made the country the envy of the world, such as fundamental freedom of religion and freedom of speech, have been under increasing attack. Ahead of Independence Day, former President Trump warned that Americans no longer have free speech. There is a powerful system of media and online censorship that only presents the leftist view. Trump is being canceled by mainstream media and big tech. There's rarely a mention of his Save America rallies if you check the mainstream sources. Yet the former president is still able to draw huge crowds. The police estimated there was as many as 25,000 at the Saturday rally in Sarasota, Florida. If there were no pressing issues, and if the 2020 election was undisputed, most likely there wouldn't be such crowds. At the rally, Trump said he continued to work with Republicans to retake the Senate and the House in 2022. The former president didn't comment further whether he'd run in 2024, but on June 30th, during an appearance on Hannity, he said he had decided.
You're not going to answer, but I have to ask. Where are you in the process of, let me ask you this, without giving the answer what the answer is, have you made up your mind?
Yes.
Talking about free speech, a new social media platform, Getter, created by former Trump advisor Jason Miller, was launched on Independence Day. He said that the platform was founded on the principles of free speech and independent thought, and has superior technology to other conservative-leaning alternatives. Miller left Trump's team recently and is now the chief executive of the social media venture. He said he hopes Trump will join the platform, but added the former president is still considering his options. At the same time, the Democrats are struggling about their party's candidate for 2024, and apparently, Kamala Harris's job performance has made the Democrats very concerned. Harris has done minimal work on anything Biden tapped her to do. Besides the border crisis, Harris is also responsible for advancing vaccination plans and investigating voting rights issues. But have you seen much of that from her? Her long-awaited trip to the southern border had little coverage. It was as if it hadn't even happened. However, from another perspective, the trip did make an impact. It exposed the dysfunction in her office. When Harris finally decided to visit the border, people in her office were blindsided. Politico described Harris's team as having low morale, porous lines of communication, and a diminished trust among aides and senior officials, while much of the rage targets the chief of staff, Tina Flournoy, who also worked in Bill Clinton's White House. Two anonymous staffers said Harris bears responsibility for the way her office is run as well. One of the officials said people are thrown under the bus from the very top. It's not somewhere people feel supported. 6 months in, some of Harris's staff are eyeing other job opportunities. Some have already resigned. The day before Harris visited El Paso, two of her top staffers, Carly Satkowiak and Gabriel DeFranceschi, quit. Harris claimed their departure was long planned, but people familiar with the situation disagreed. An insider said Harris's office is run very differently from the Obama operation, where DeFranceschi previously worked. It appears the former deputy director of Advance was frustrated about not having her opinions listened to. Harris is the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party in 2024. While Biden said he will run again, he would be 81 by then. And practically speaking, Biden's health might not allow him to run. But if Harris is the nominee, some Democrat officials now say she couldn't defeat any Republican candidate, whomever the GOP puts up, not to mention former President Trump. It's a terrible sign for any Democrat candidate that there's outspoken criticism from his or her own party. The Biden administration announced on July 2nd that it's launching an interagency effort to allow millions of immigrants to become citizens. The federal campaign will actively recruit eligible immigrants and eliminate many naturalization rules that the Trump administration put into place. The administration has recognized two pieces of Democrat legislation: the American Dream and Promise Act and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. These two measures are expected to create a pathway to citizenship for some 11 million. The two acts have passed the House, but not the Senate. However, this campaign isn't only eyeing permanent residents. It also aims to reach out to people who are early in their immigration process and not yet eligible for naturalization. This raises eyebrows as to whether the effort would help illegals obtain status to stay as well. Americans continue to dispute the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. A federal judge from Ohio dealt a blow to the Biden administration by issuing a permanent order to block the tax mandate in the relief bill. District Judge Douglas Cole ruled the ambiguous tax mandate seems to tie the relief funds to the state's authority to reduce tax. It exceeds Congress's authority as a constitutional violation of separation of powers. The bill states, a state or territory cannot use the funds to reduce tax or delay the imposition of any tax or tax increase. A number of red states argue this provision forces states to relinquish control of their taxing authority. After Ohio became the first state to sue the administration over the tax mandate, other red states quickly followed suit. In a separate case filed by Alabama, 13 state attorneys general claimed the provision is one of the most egregious power grabs by the federal government. With the new ruling defending the Constitution, it may set the precedent for the Alabama lawsuit to reinstate states' tax authorities. Now, before we continue, please hit that like button and subscribe. And most importantly, share this video with your friends and family. Word of mouth, as we all know, is the most effective way to spread the truth. And if you want to support Eye Opener, please consider donating to the show or purchasing a mug that matters. You can find the link in the description below, and your support is greatly appreciated. Salute. At the sound of gunshots, prisoners fell lifeless to the ground. Still warm, they were carried to a nearby white van where two doctors were waiting. Behind closed doors, they were cut open. Their organs were sold for transplant. This horrific scene was from the 90s, former Chinese police officer Bob, a pseudonym, recently told his experience to the Epoch Times with shocking details about the crime of forced human organ harvesting in China. Bob joined the police force in 1996. In 1999, an online post critical of the communist regime led to his year-long detention. As a prisoner, Bob observed the handling of death row inmates and connected the dots of the organ harvesting process. Once sentenced to death, an inmate would be slapped into hand and ankle cuffs. The ankle cuffs weighed up to 33 pounds to prevent escape. A blood test, a step to identify organ donors, and a checkup on their mental and physical health would then follow. The prisoner had no idea why they were being tested. Executions typically occurred ahead of major holidays. Prisoners slated for organ harvesting were typically young, healthy men in their 20s or 30s. Prior to execution, inmates were injected with painkillers to prevent blood from curdling after they'd been executed, which would damage organs. An on-site medical examiner would confirm death. The bodies determined for organ extraction were then rushed to the white van. The rear door was kept shut and the windows were covered. Bob once caught a glimpse inside. He saw an operating table, 2 doctors in white gowns, and the floor was covered in a plastic tarp. The doctors swiftly closed the doors after realizing someone was watching. The operation was done in the van instead of a hospital because timing is critical in organ transplants. The whole process was quick. Bob said the workflow, the adeptness they showed, and the closeness in their cooperation could not have happened in just 1 or 2 years. What Bob described was from more than 20 years ago when death row prisoners were the primary victims. However, since 2000, the Chinese transplant industry has boomed. The number of executed prisoners was far lower than the number of transplants taking place. The CCP claimed only a few hospitals performed more than 10,000 transplants per year. For example, Tianjin Central Hospital has at least 500 dedicated transplant beds, reportedly running at 130% occupancy. With 20 to 30-day patient stays, this hospital alone could perform 8,000 transplants a year. With at least 169 hospitals with transplant permits, they perform an estimated 60,000 to 100,000 annually. The actual number of participating hospitals is almost surely much larger. The number of executed prisoners is up to 10,000 per year. The CCP must have a much bigger pool to account for the donors. At the Uyghur Tribunal in June, experts testify that the Communist Party harvests the organs of concentration camp victims, and the number of political prisoners have grown since the establishment of the camps. Practitioners of Falun Gong, a spiritual and meditation practice, are said to be the biggest source of the organs. The followers say because they abstain from drugs and alcohol and dedicate significant efforts to their physical well-being, they became ideal targets. We want to bring this story to light because organ harvesting is probably the biggest crime against humanity in the world. Players in this abhorrent crime industry include the judicial system, police, prisons, doctors, CCP officials, as well as people from other countries who travel to China for organs. In the United States, wait time for organ transplants could stretch on for years, while in China, organ transplants happen in a matter of weeks or even days, which attracts organ transplant tourists from abroad. A body with usable organs can bring between $500,000 to $750,000. It means the transplant business brings in tens of billions to the CCP each year. This equates to hundreds of thousands of Chinese executed on demand. For years, countries outside of China have turned a blind eye to it due to the growing economic power of the CCP. In other words, all countries that trade with China allow it to happen. But the ETAC, the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, gathered extensive information and committed to ending the horror of forced organ harvesting. Bipartisan legislation led by Senator Tom Cotton was first introduced in December last year. The measure was reintroduced again in March. However, it's not only the responsibility of lawmakers to pass such measures. All Americans need to be aware of what is going on around the world. And that's it for today, my friends. Check out this playlist right here for more eye-opening content. You can join me in the Eye Opener Telegram chat room and follow me on Newmaker, Gab, and Parler. Don't forget, sign up to the email list so that we can stay in touch. I'd like to thank you all, and I'll see you next time.